Cool. Alright, very quick video. I've spent a fair bit of time developing and hopefully sort of a release just before Au Naturel 6 next version. But this is a quick sort of a tech explanation video because I don't know whether you can tell or not, but I've taken out, well, I haven't taken out, it's still there, but it's not turned on at the moment. We've removed the Distant Horizons fork that we created, try to support Au Naturel 5, and we've moved over to Voxy derivation is what I'm calling it. It's basically Voxy, I mean, you know, Voxy, Voxy, Voxy. It seems to be all the rage at the moment. And this is one of my test worlds that I have to use while developing and debugging and things, so it's sort of semi-generated. We've got a few chunks and things already built up, but I thought I'd take you through the current state. This is probably pretty close to sort of releasing. We've got a couple of things that we want to sort out. I'm still debating whether to do server based things like Distant Horizons. I'm not sure what it works, and I sort of like the general feel of you know, the fog of war, playing in a world that you haven't explored yet. But anyway, we'll get onto that. So, what have we done? Well, as you possibly know, Au Naturel is a 1.21 Forge mod pack, which creates a bit of an issue in that there is no version of Voxy vaguely available for Forge. I want to say period. There's a couple of forks out there for later versions. No version for 1.20.1. No version for, well, no working version for 1.21 Forge. So we've, well, I've developed my own. We've ported it over. But if anyone's been sort of following along, you'll also know that Au Naturel has its own version of, what is it? Embedium? And its own version of Oculus, Forks of Forks. To try to give us some more sort of seasonal world-based things. So not only have we sort of forked Voxy, we've forked it to work on Forge, and we've forked it to work with our version of Oculus and our version of Embedium specifically, so that we retain the ability to maintain our latitude-based shader effects, our our temperature-based shader effects, our various sort of seasonal-based lighting and things like that. Yeah. So that's sort of where we are at the moment, and things are looking pretty good. Now, aside from just the challenge of forking, especially in a mod pack with 500 or so mods and the general compatibility and issues, I thought I'd take you through a little chat on the decisions that we've had to make and the things that we've done along the way. Where to start? The dynamic trees, I feel, is like a nice little sort of thing to exemplify sort of the decisions that have made in sort of this sort of graphics rendering challenge. Not going to get too technical, not only because I probably can't, but probably be sort of boring. But when you're trying to render LODs or build LODs or things like that, actually, I don't know whether you saw her from the background. Let's see. Oh. Can you see it? Yeah, look at that. We also built in distant generation, because that's one of the best things about Distant Horizon, not having to pre-generate the world and chunky. And as you will probably know through my previous versions of Au Naturel, one of my design goals was to be able to have the player come into the world on survival and just start playing without pre-generating or preloading the world. So now Voxy still has its sort of import commands available, but you don't need to do it anymore, because you can set, and I'll show you. Where are we here? You can set the distant generation option. You can set the distant generation radius separate from the render radius, which is incidentally something that we were working on separating out in our Distant Horizons port until we sort of separated to working on Voxy instead. But the ability to separate the idea of distant generation from the idea of render distance has always been something that I've wanted to do. And it looks like we've finally got it working in this Voxy port. So that's nice. Yeah, you don't have to generate the world. Chunky's still here, so you certainly can, and you can still import things, and you can force import to refresh all of the LODs if something goes wrong, if you get holes in the world. We have attempted to make our distant generation algorithm run in such a way that you do not get holes in the world. So the basic gist of it is that the area that gets connected, aside from also being calculated via the camera angles and the player position, is also done in such a way that it is connected to the chunks that already exist in the Minecraft world. So you never get holes or anything like that, or ideally you shouldn't. And it's been actually working pretty well. Anyway, so yeah, distant chunk generation, separating the render and world gen settings and things like that. It's going pretty well. But let's get back to some of the sort of technical challenges. Dynamic trees. When you're trying to render LODs, build LODs, things like that. One of the challenges, especially with the likes of dynamic trees, is they have these blocks which are not defined just by the individual block state. They're defined by the block state and the connection of the branches around them. So let's see if I can find some of these things. Right, yeah. So it's all well and good when you're in sort of like a loaded chunk. You see these sort of like, whoa, yeah, anyway. Yeah, anyway. See these sort of organic, winding, different thickness trees. Those branches and trunks and things, their thickness and their shape and relationship and positioning in the block is related to the state of the blocks and the presence of blocks around them. Now this creates a bit of a challenge when you're trying to create a LOD system, because in Voxy especially, you want to be able to bake models and LODs and textures and blah 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 based just on the state of the block itself. If you have to take into account the state of the world around the block, well then things become just nightmarishly complicated. Scales way too fast. I'm not going to say it's impossible, but it gets to the state where you might as well call it impossible, at least for a heavily modded mod pack that includes these mods that have not been designed from a central sort of philosophy or things like that. So what do you do? In case you didn't know, when you try to render these things as LODs, in LODs, it ends up looking really awful. The branches become floating, the LODs can't get the context of the things around them. It just sort of gets rather nightmarish. So our way around it, I think it looks pretty good, as you can possibly see looking off into the distance of the dynamic trees. As they exist now, you have to come up with a solution that balances off the visual cues, the visual quality with the technical possibilities. Now, I don't know whether you know this, but some of these things, let's have a look at that branch over there. Let's see if we can zoom in. Some of these dynamic tree branches, they're so thin that if you tried to put them into some sort of LOD representation, they probably wouldn't show up. That means that when you render them a super long distance away, or even try to combine them with surrounding blocks or things like that, fun stuff is going to happen. Actually, it's probably possibly going to turn invisible or be dominated by those, and the trees end up with these sort of floating canopy looks. Not to mention before, the block context challenge was already a thing. So our solution around that, and as I said, I think it actually looks pretty good, is to have a substitute wood relationship with these parts of the dynamic tree structure. So the trees default in the LODs to these wood blocks, and these are contextless wood blocks. They're just like regular trees. But what it means is that in the LODs and things like that, although in the render distance they become these dynamic, very complex branch and trunk and thing structures, off in the distance there, the LODs think they're basically built up out of regular Minecraft blocks, and we have a relationship between the trunk and the branch structures and things like that, and the very specific things. I'll just set the time back today. So when we zoom in on some of those dynamic trees out in the distance there in the LOD space, that looks like it's still thingy space. That looks more like LOD space. You can see the branches are still very organic. They look organic from this far away, but they take on the qualities of regular Minecraft blocks, and that means that from these distance they still render in the LOD, which I think looks really good personally compared to what they looked like before. Still gives a sense of structure, still gives the skeleton shape of the tree, even though it's technically a different block being rendered at that time. Yeah, so it looks, in my opinion, really good. The trees look thin, and as you may or may not know, technically, difference between Distant Horizons and Voxy, aside from various models and things like that, you also tend to get textures baked in. So whereas Distant Horizons used a sort of colour, for lack of a better word, I mean it was colour, colour of the blocks, sometimes overlaid with some noise texture and things like that. Voxy has actual textures. You can zoom in, you can see some of the textures on things. You can see the textures on the trunks, which in Distant Horizons, you can see some of the textures on the stone and the things in the background. You can see the models of the bamboo. They're not just big chunks of colour. You can see all of these things, and the same goes for the trees and stuff like that. So yeah, it creates this real sort of increase in fidelity, in my opinion. What other sort of... oh, yes, so I mentioned this is our test world. Actually, let's talk about Photon shaders, because obviously importing Voxy for Au Naturel 6, or, you know, that's if we ever get to release it. We've also had to keep the shaders, our fork of Photon shaders, make sure that they know how to talk to our version of Voxy, which talks to our version of Oculus and Embedium. We did a fair bit of work on our Voxy shaders, especially with the release of Photon 1.3b. Fixed up a bunch of bugs. Got subsurface scattering working well. Made some sort of explicit fixes and things with the modded blocks and the like. Brought those in so they look nice. Grabbed the shadow technique from 1.3b, which we didn't have in ours. Fixed some bugs with the shadows underwater. Fixed some crashes with the various things. Now, you might have already picked up, I don't usually play with depth of field and stuff on, but we've made some changes there too. So when you focus in automatically, see here, on these super close blocks, and the background becomes automatically blurry. Now, there is a limit, because I can't stand depth of field. I mean, it's not optically true, but I feel from a play sense, when you focus on items that are close to you, old depth of field mechanics would fuzz those objects super close to you as well. So there'd be a sort of a, what do we call it in photography? I've already forgotten, my god, it's been years. Whatever, either way, the point is that in proper optics and things like that, objects that are outside of the focus range should become fuzzy. You know, when they're too close to you, they also become fuzzy when they're too far away from you. We've set editable lower bound so that things closer to you in the focus point do not become fuzzy. So when you look off into the distance, those things become back in focus. When you look in close, the distance goes fuzzy, but those things between you... And the reason for doing this is because when you're sort of like running through the wilderness and you're focusing on these close blocks, my god, the way the autofocus and the depth of field would just go absolutely nuts, you know, focusing on things that close, focus things on things that close, then the block super close to you would be out of focus. So this one primarily maintains the effect to only sort of happen on things off into the distance and keeps those things that are close to you in focus. And then when you look off into the distance, that area comes into focus again. Quite nice for a depth of field thing, which is, honestly, an effect that I usually play with it off anyway. Yeah, what else? I mentioned the subsurface scattering, which we've got fixed, included a bunch of modded blocks and turned on by default now. So a lot of the leaves and things like that. See if I can sort of give an example. Where's that sun? Right above us. See here with the shaded parts of the leaves, and the top of it have highlights and things like that. That's the leaf subsurface scattering going on. So it makes everything look much more sort of three-dimensional and things in the various weather systems and times of things. And if we go to midnight, you can see even the moonlight changes the look of the leaves and the things and the world around us. Now, one more change. We added in, you don't know if we'll see them. I mean, this is an effect that we've always had. We've always had the textured moon and things like that. Nope, there it was, a shooting star. We've taken the technique used in, from where was it? Complementary shaders with their shooting star system and imported into ours alongside our already existent meteors. If you want to go, what's the word? Looking at the surface of the moon, you can. That is indeed the texture of the actual moon, for those who are curious. And I think I've already sort of mentioned this before, the stars are based on the actual distribution of star densities in our Milky Way, and it looks like our sky. It's not the actual sort of constellation, so you won't see Orion or anything like that. But yeah, if you're ever sort of wondering, the density and some of the lighting and things like that, modelled off of what our sky looks like. But those are procedurally generated stars. So we added in just a little extra bit of shooting stars. We've still got our basic meteors and things like that in there as well. They're pretty rare, but you look in the sky, they happen. What else? I think I mentioned we had a bunch of bug fixes, things like that. Okay. Fixed underwater shadows. It's barely worth my time showing you because I don't have them pre-state, and I mean, yeah, it's going to look like an underwater shadow, hopefully. Added just a bunch of sort of technical stuff. Made the underwater shadows have coloured fringes matching the tint of the water. There was some issues with the fringes around that. Anyway, it's all been fixed up and it looks a lot nicer. I mean, depending on the biome and things like that. Now, yeah, one of the other cool things that we've added in here is, let's see if I can show you, since this is my test world. Alright, let's fly up. You see up on that ridge up there, that's one of my test locations. Very good. You might recognize some certain blocks and things. Hell, let's start over here. Whoop, let's fly up a bit so that we can see things from a decent angle. Now, yeah, if you see that ridge over there, those are all LODs and things like that. At least I'm pretty sure they should be. Now let's just move back a bit just to make absolutely sure. At this range, you can see I've pumped up the render distance general up to about 16, 17, 18 chunks or so. Up from the, I can't remember if it was 12 or 14 that we used in Voxy. And we're getting good frame rates and things too. Has to be said. So where were we? Looking at the, well, yeah, depends how. So over on that ridge over there, I've got my sort of test objects. Our scope for a Voxy derivative is basically all of the mods and blocks that we choose to have in Au Naturel, which is about 500 of them, some of them very popular, some of them not. One of the issues that Voxy has, or had, possibly still has, we'll see how we go once we sort of get more people testing, is problems rendering some of the block entities and things like that. But there is a certain subclass of block entities which some are complex, like the dynamic trees branches. Some are not complex in that they can still be technically defined by their state, and not necessarily those of around them. Now that goes for chests, which are up there. Now, yeah, old regular Voxy has sort of issues with chests and things like that, and that, as far as I know, it doesn't render them. Just for the record, we've made a patch to our version of Embedium, which will probably release soon. Apparently there was a thing whereby block entities and things have a upper bound of about 64 things under shaders or something. I don't know why. Vanilla Minecraft, something like that. Whereby they would not render over 64 blocks distance. So we've patched Embedium, I think it was, to let you do that, so that now they render all the way up to LOD distance. And when they go off into LOD distance, they are now rendered properly. That's how it works. Whereas regular Voxy tends to not successfully bake and work with the chest and block entity things. But chests, as well as modded chests, are in there. Now you'll also probably have noticed, and I've sort of been avoiding it, but certain parts of create blocks and things, and some of them with rather complex geometries and states. Some of them with block entities that notionally render to more than just the single block around them. We've added some changes and things like them to have a go at rendering them in the LODs too, and you can see here they work pretty well. Now, you know, those who are super perceptive will see there's a little issue with the crushing things. Personally, I think we just have to live with it for now. The issue is that when you put two adjacent to each other, the renderer system tries to fill in the blocks around it. Currently I have it so that those can only be filled in when there's empty space or air or some such around them. When you have two crushes right next to each other, they tend to be not air around them, so you get a little bit of an overlap, but it's only really visible when you have two next to each other and you look straight at it with a looking glass, which doesn't happen that often. Everything else looks pretty good. Yeah, so those render more or less properly. There are some blocks from Create which, like the dynamic trees branches, cannot be simplified just on their own block state, and those sort of things will generally collapse down to a single block model, for lack of a better word. So thinking about some of the fluid pipes and stuff like that, which can sort of snake and connect to things around them, they tend to, in LODs, collapse down back into just sort of like copper or brass blocks, or as you can see with the conveyor belt thing there, collapses down to a basic texture. But that's fine. Oh, and the other, back to the other block entities, we've got basic flag rendering and things like that. Flag? Banners, that's what they're called. So that's my little test zone over there, trying to figure out how they work. I think those are in the LOD space. Just trying to move back a bit to make sure. But that's basically what they look like in such. Anyway. Yeah, so rather than being invisible, we've got a lot more blocks and things that actually render. And now as I approach, just to prove that those things are in fact create blocks and things like that, we'll watch. Now, if the perceptive of you might see down in the corner there some red stuff, there's some photon bugs and things. I'll see if I can address them. I know what's causing them. Doesn't tend to happen too much except for when you're flying around in creative. It's the shadows and bloom and stuff. Get into that. The very perceptive, because this is a very hot desert environment, you'll see some of those oculus shader effects that you can see the heat waving off of the air. Let's see if I can get closer. Yeah. don't know if you can easily see that. It's a very subtle effect, the heat distortions from being in hot environments, hot desert environments. Yeah, that's one of the reasons why we wanted our own Oculus, we wanted our own NVIDIA, we wanted our own shaders so that we could add effects like that, which are not really possible under the public versions. Yeah, I really love it. Alright, but as you can see, these are create machines. Now, I've probably got some more jobs to do here with, whatchamacallit. I mean, they're not, you know, the create blocks. I've only got one creative motor or something there, just to sort of work as a proof of concept. But, you know, in our sort of mod pack where create is, I don't want to say central, but at least a, important part. I feel like it's important to not just have all of their blocks just vanish once you get to LOD distance. You want them to be a part of the game, and now you can pick up when we actually get to the LOD distance. I think we just crossed it if we're not about to. Yeah. I don't want to say imperceptibly. Works really well. Visible. Part of the LODs. Can see them from a distance. Yeah, so that's more or less it, I think. Things are working really well. I think everything's looking good. We've got compatibility with a lot more blocks and things that regular Voxy was not working with. We've got our Photon shaders working well, lots of updates there and bug fixes. Everything's looking pretty nice. So from here on out, I have to make some decisions about what I'm going to do with respect to the server version of this server-client relationship. Whether to bother with that or not, I'm still a bit torn. I'm not sure I'm going to go with the Distant Horizons sort of effects. Yeah, I'll figure it out. But after that and a bit more testing, I think it's time to go begging to the Voxy dev and see if we can't come to some arrangement where I can release this in a publicly accessible form. Because yeah, I'm really happy with it. It's working quite nicely. Everything's looking good at the moment. Let's just fly up and have a look around. You can see Tan's huge trees, by the way, over there. Some of those super large tree models. Pink guy. Various redwoods. Makes a really, really nice atmosphere of sort of walking through deep forests and things like that. Cool. That's where we're up to. I don't think there's too much other than to say, yeah, Voxy, I mean, looks amazing as always. Photon shaders look amazing as always, and combined together with the world generation of Au Naturel and all of the sort of mods that went into it. I mean, it's, you know, it's always a bit awkward trying to not take full credit for the whole thing because it's not me. There are 500 mods and probably 100 or so mod authors responsible for all of the components and bits that go into making something like this. I've been working on it for about a year and a bit now, year and a half probably. God, I don't know if it's even getting on to 2 years. But yeah, been pretty good. Alright. I think I might leave it there, and we'll see what we can do in terms of release dates. Not immediately, but hopefully soon. Alright. I kind of want to see one more shooting star or a meteor. Meteors are rarer than the shooting stars, so you don't tend to see them that often. Statistically about 2 every minute or so, but that assumes that you have a camera that can see the entire night sky, which we do not. So technically it would probably be less than that. But on clear nights, and it'll also, yeah, contextual with, I think, the phase of the moon. But I do like hunting for them. Whoa. Come on. Probably going to look like a bad one too. Oh well. Watched pot never boils, as they say. Oh, yeah, there's a little one. Alright, whatever. Alright. I'll sign off now and probably get back to oh, figure out the last bits before I'm happy that it's sort of more or less working. In case it's not obvious, yeah, the frame rate and the performance is pretty damn good under Voxy, gotta say. Right, cheers.